I want to talk about lenses today, and guess what I've got right here? It's the Sony GMaster F2.8 16-35 Mark II. I matched it with the Sony FX3. We're gonna vlog a little bit, take some B-roll and some photography, and we're gonna talk about it. I'm using the lens right now at 16 millimeters, 50 centimeters from my face, using the autofocus. So it's gonna give you a little bit an idea of how the lens looks, but also about the stabilization, because I'm walking as well, and the autofocus capabilities. I guess you can vlog at 16 millimeters, but I can zoom in maybe at 20 as well, or 24, and yeah, see if the autofocus still works. This is 28 millimeters at the moment. Stabilization still looks alright to me, but I like to show you a bit of the environment and the landscape today as well. So let's vlog at 16 millimeters. Also note I'm using a variable ND filter on top of the lens today, just for this B-roll and vlogging, and then maybe I'm gonna take it off and we're gonna take some photography. What is this lens? So it's the world's smallest f2.8 wide-angle zoom lens. Whew. It's part of the holy trinity of lenses, which I talked about in my previous videos, but basically it's part of the 16-35, 24-70 and 70-200 millimeters range of lenses. So with these three lenses you can cover the whole range and get any shot you can possibly think about. In terms of mount, we have the Sony E-Mount, so you can match it with all the E-Mount cameras out there, including the Sony FX3 and all the A7 series as well, for example. Talking about the format of the lens, it's a full frame lens, but of course it can be used on the APS-C sensors. When you use this lens on a crop sensor camera, you will achieve a focal length range that goes from 24 millimeters to 52.5. If you want to talk about angle of view, when used on a full frame, we can cover an angle that goes from 107 degrees to 63. And when used on a crop sensor, then we go from 83 degrees to 44.2. So there's a big crop factor right there. The filter size in front of the lens is 82 millimeters, and that's what I'm using at the moment for my ND filter as well. The body of the lens is water resistant. I actually used it in the Philippines in different conditions. For example, on the sand, salty air, along the sea. It rained as well and it got a bit wet and I had no issues at all. So I think it's working. The barrel of the lens, when you zoom out, still comes out of the actual body of the lens, like in version 1 of this 16-35, but it sticks out a bit less than the previous version. We have 3 rings on the body, one for the focus, one for the focal length, and one actually for the aperture. So you have manual iris on the lens as well. We have a switch to go from autofocus and manual focus, but also we have 2 customizable focus hold buttons. Dimensions and weight. So the size of the lens is 87.8 millimeters by 111.5. The weight is 547 grams. That's probably the biggest reason why I purchased this lens and I sold version 1. I work most of the time traveling, commuting, and I need to save my back, literally. I'm actually renewing and upgrading my gear as soon as I can, just to travel lighter. And then we're going to talk about other reasons why I got this lens as well. So let's talk about the focus for a second. And first of all, we have noiseless focus motor. So whenever you use the autofocus, your microphone won't pick up any sound at all, which is great for video recording. We have eye autofocus supported on enabled cameras, for example, like the Sony FX3. And the one coming is one of the other reasons why I purchased this lens, which is the minimum focus distance from your subject, which is now 22 centimeters from the subject at 16 millimeters when you use your lens at 16 millimeters, which is actually closer than the previous version. So you can kind of use this lens for, well, I wouldn't say macro shots, but be very, very close to your subjects. Aperture. So we can open up the iris from f2.8 and close it to f22. Of course, it's a very bright lens. You can really open it up and get a nice shallow depth of field. And of course, we can use this lens in low light conditions. We have 11 blades inside the lens in terms of aperture, and that creates a circular aperture, which makes a better looking bokeh as well and less vignetting. And as mentioned before, we have a manual aperture ring on the body. If you want to know what comes with the lens, we have a hood, a front and back lens cap. We have a soft case and also a case strap. Stabilization, we have in-body stabilization in the Mark II of the 16-35 GMaster. We are back in studio because I checked some of the footage and the photos actually to give you better feedback on the lens itself. So, talking about sharpness, this lens is great, very sharp in the center of the image, of course, but also on the edges. I couldn't really see much of a difference. Bear in mind that I took some videos and photos with the Sony FX3, which has a 12 megapixel resolution, so it's not the best photo camera out there, and that could actually influence the final result, but still I couldn't see any difference between the edges and the center of the frame. In terms of chromatic aberration, I noticed a bit of magenta tint, especially when I was taking photos of very intricate textures. For example, through these palm trees, you can see a bit of magenta. I'm not sure if that comes from the sensor of the camera or the lens itself, because I've actually took the same shot with a different lens and still I had magenta in the same spots. Distortion wise, I couldn't notice much of a distortion on straight lines, but you will see a distortion on people, for example, if they are at the edges of your frame. In the center, it's okay, especially at 35 millimeters, but when you're shooting at 16, yes, the image is a bit distorted, as you can see here. My thoughts about this lens: great piece of gear. I'm very happy I actually upgraded because, in particular, of the quality of the image, but also for the portability. It's smaller and lighter than the previous version, and of course, it's gonna help my body in carrying on through the years. The price, I paid the lens £2,050, which is a lot of money, so it's worth it if you're a professional, if you work with photography and video making, of course, because I can see it's an investment. So it's an investment about your profession and your future as well. And it was worth for me. I'm not sure if that's the lens for a hobbyist, for example. I think it's a great lens for traveling and a great focal length as well for traveling. You've got wide angle at 16, you can do some portrait at 35. It's very bright, again, portable, and it's a top quality glass. Also very useful, I think, for gimbal work, especially when you're working as a self-shooter, as I do most of the time, because you've got this different range, it's light, you can put it on a gimbal with a smaller mirrorless. Also, I heard Sony improved the way the barrel moves inside the body. So on the previous version, you had the barrel sticking out here a bit more, and when you placed your lens on the gimbal, you had to rebalance your gimbal because the weight was going towards the front now of the kit. But apparently here there are elements that counterbalance the weight of the barrel when it moves forward. So whenever you place the lens on the gimbal and you change the focal length, you won't have to rebalance the gimbal because it will do it automatically inside the lens. So that's a great plus for version 2 here. So there you go. That's my feedback on the 16-35. Once again, great lens. If you can afford it, totally recommend it. I hope the video helped out. Subscribe, as always, I have to say it. And I can't wait to see you in the next video. Take care, guys.